The gun was already on the table when Simone walked in. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood in the doorway of what was supposed to be a private conference room on the 32nd floor of the Harlow Tower in Chicago, gripped her leather portfolio against her chest, and stared at the man sitting at the head of the table like he had been waiting for her specifically. He had not been waiting for her. That much was clear from the way his jaw tightened when she stepped inside. He was Korean, mid-30s, with the kind of face that belonged on the cover of something expensive, sharp jaw, dark eyes that moved over her once and then away, like she was a problem he was already calculating how to solve. His suit was charcoal gray and fit like it had been sewn onto his body. The two men flanking him looked like they could move a building with their hands. The gun on the table belonged to the man across from him, who now looked very nervous about the fact that a stranger had just walked in on whatever this was. Simone looked at the gun. Looked at the man at the head of the table. Looked back at the gun. "I have the wrong floor," she said. "Yes," the man at the head of the table said. His voice was low and even, like someone who had never once raised it because he had never needed to. "You do." She backed toward the door. "Don't," he said. "Not loud. Just fine now." She stopped. His dark eyes held hers across the room and something moved through the air between them that had nothing to do with the gun on the table and everything to do with the fact that neither of them looked away first. "Sit down," he said. "We'll sort this out when I'm finished." Simone Adeyemi had grown up on the south side of Chicago. She had put herself through Northwestern on scholarships and sheer stubbornness. She had survived a father who left and a mother who worked double shifts and a city that did not make room for girls who looked like her unless they fought for it. She was not the kind of woman who sat down when a stranger told her to. She sat down. Something almost imperceptible shifted at the corner of his mouth. His name, she would learn in the next 20 minutes, was Kang Hyun-seok. And by the time she learned it, she already understood that her life had just divided itself into two parts, everything before this room, and everything after. Hyun-seok finished his business in 11 minutes. The nervous man across the table signed 3 documents without reading them, collected his gun with shaking hands, and left without looking at Simone once. The 2 flanking guards stepped back. Hyun-seok finally turned his full attention to her and she felt it like a physical thing, the weight of being looked at by someone who was accustomed to seeing exactly what was in front of him. "Simone Adeyemi," he said, reading from his phone. "Commercial real estate consultant. You had a meeting on the 34th floor with Harlow Development Group." She stared at him. "How do you know my name?" "Your appointment was in the building system. You were redirected to this floor by mistake when the elevator bank rerouted." He set the phone down. "It was not intentional. And yet here I am." She kept her voice steady. Her heart was doing something completely different. Sitting in a room where someone just left a gun on the table. "The gun is irrelevant to you." "It really isn't." His eyes moved over her face slowly. She was wearing her hair in short natural coils today, her deep brown skin smooth against the white collar of her blazer, and she had the distinct uncomfortable feeling that this man noticed details the way other people notice weather, automatically, constantly, without effort. "You're not going to pretend you didn't see anything?" he asked. "I'm a consultant, not an idiot. I saw exactly what I saw." She kept her eyes on his. "The question is what you plan to do about it." Something changed in his expression. Not softness exactly. More like recalibration. Like he had walked in expecting one kind of conversation and found himself in a different one entirely. "I plan to let you go to your meeting," he said. "And you plan to remember nothing unusual about this afternoon. And if I don't agree to that? Then we have a longer conversation." The room was very quiet. Simone held his gaze and told herself the prickling along the back of her neck was fear and not something else. Not something that had no business existing in a conference room with a man who had just watched someone sign documents at gunpoint. "Fine," she said. I don't remember anything. She stood, smoothed her blazer, picked up her portfolio. 34th floor is 2 up, he said. I know how elevators work. She walked to the door and she did not let herself look back. She could feel him watching her all the way out. She thought about him for 3 days and hated herself for it. She went to her meeting, landed the contract, drove home, made dinner, and told herself that the entire incident was filed away and finished. She was a professional. She had a full client roster and a lease renewal coming up on her office space and approximately 0 room in her life for whatever that man represented. By day 3 she had stopped lying to herself about whether she was thinking about him. By day 5, he called. She picked up because she didn't recognize the number and she always picked up for potential clients. The moment she heard his voice, that same low, even register, her whole body went still. Miss Adeyemi. How did you get this number? I told you I was letting you go to your meeting. I didn't say I was done with the conversation. She sat back in her office chair. Through the glass wall she could see her assistant at her desk, oblivious. What do you want? I have a commercial property I need assessed. A legitimate one. A brief pause. I'm told you're the best in Chicago. You're told correctly. Then I'd like to retain you. Every sensible part of her brain said no. Said file it under bad ideas, close the drawer, lose the number. She had built everything she had on her own instincts and her instincts had never once steered her wrong. Her instincts right now were doing something complicated and not entirely professional. Send me the property details, she said. I'll look them over. Already sent. She pulled up her email. There it was, timestamped 4 minutes ago, as if he had already known what her answer would be. She didn't know whether to be annoyed or impressed, and the fact that she couldn't decide irritated her more than either option alone. I'll be in touch, she said. I know, Hyun-seok said. And hung up. If you are new here and this story already has you gripped, hit that subscribe button right now because we release stories like this every week and you do not want to miss what is coming next. The property was a former industrial complex on the west side, 3 buildings, significant square footage, bones that any developer would kill for. On paper it was a straightforward assessment. In practice, Simone spent the first site visit hyper-aware of every moment Hyun-seok stood near her. He showed up in person. She hadn't expected that. He was dressed down compared to the conference room, dark trousers, a simple black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, and somehow that was worse. He walked the property with her, asked intelligent questions, listened to her answers without interrupting. He knew more about commercial development than most of her actual developer clients. When she pointed that out, he gave her a look that was almost dry. I've been in business a long time. What kind of business exactly? Currently. Real estate development. Currently, she repeated. Is that a problem? She looked at him sideways. The afternoon light cut across his face and she noticed again, against her better judgment, the way he looked when he was focused on something, like the rest of the world had been paused and only the thing directly in front of him existed. Depends on what preceded currently, she said. Nothing that touches you. The way he said it, low and certain, like a door closing, made something move through her chest that she refused to name. They walked the rest of the property in a silence that was not uncomfortable in the way silences usually weren't comfortable. It was the kind of quiet that had weight to it. The kind that meant both people were thinking things they weren't saying. Back at her car, she was loading her notes into her bag when he spoke. Have dinner with me. She looked up. He wasn't looking away. That's not part of the contract, she said. No. He held her gaze. It isn't. She should have said no. She had 100 good reasons and she was aware of every single one of them standing there in the gravel of a West Side parking lot with the Chicago wind pulling at her coat. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded once, like that was the answer he'd expected, and walked back toward his car. She watched him go and reminded herself, firmly, that this was a professional arrangement. She called him that same evening. Yes, she said when he picked up, before he could say anything. A pause. Then, 7 o'clock. I'll send the address. She could have sworn she heard the very edges of a smile in his voice. Dinner was not what she expected. No entourage. No power place. He took her to a small Korean restaurant in Wicker Park that had no sign outside and 40 seats inside and food that made her close her eyes on the first bite. He ordered for both of them, translating each dish as it arrived, watching her face when she tasted things with that same focused attention he gave everything. They talked for 3 hours. She found out he had grown up between Seoul and Chicago, that his father had built the organization from nothing and handed it to a son who had spent his entire adult life trying to determine what was his by choice versus what was his by inheritance. She found out he read actual books, history, mostly, and that he had a younger sister in medical school in Seoul who called him every Sunday and was the only person in the world he admitted could make him nervous. He found out about her mother, still working, refusing to retire. About the first deal Simone had ever closed at 26, a property everyone told her was too risky, that ended up tripling in value in 4 years. About the way she made decisions, instinct first, analysis second guessing never. You lead with your gut, he said. Always. What does your gut say right now? The question landed quiet and direct across the small table. The restaurant had emptied around them without either of them noticing. The candlelight was doing things to the angles of his face that she was trying very hard not to notice. That this is complicated, she said honestly. Most things worth having are. Hyun-seok. She said his name carefully, the way you say something you have been practicing. I don't know enough about your world to know if I fit in it. I'm not asking you to fit into it. His eyes were steady on hers. I'm asking if you want to know me. The honesty of it caught her off guard. She had expected something smoother. Something more constructed. Not something that sounded like a man who was choosing words carefully because they actually mattered to him. I want to know you, she said quietly. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then his hand crossed the table and covered hers, and it was such a simple thing, just his hand over hers, but her whole body registered it like something significant had just shifted in the atmosphere. They left the restaurant at midnight, walking a block in the cold Chicago air before he stopped them both and turned to face her. She looked up at him. He reached out and touched her jaw with the backs of his fingers, a question, not a statement, and she answered it by closing the distance herself. The kiss was slow and warm and unhurried, his hand cradling her face like she was something he intended to be careful with. When they pulled back, she kept her eyes closed for a breath longer than she meant to. Still complicated, he murmured. More than ever, she said. And kissed him again. 3 weeks of Hyun-seok was 3 weeks of learning the specific shape of someone who existed in 2 worlds simultaneously. There was the Hyun-seok who sent her coffee to her office on mornings she mentioned having early calls. Who texted her at odd hours, not urgently, just small things, a photo of a building he thought she'd have opinions about, a question about a book she had recommended. Who listened when she talked about work with the kind of attention most people reserve for things that directly concerned them. And there was the other one, the one she caught glimpses of in the way rooms reconfigured themselves when he entered. The way his demeanor shifted when his phone rang at certain times and he stepped away and came back with his jaw set differently. The men who appeared and disappeared from the edges of their evenings. The silences he didn't explain and she didn't ask about because she was not sure she was ready for those answers yet. She was falling. She knew it the way you know the ground is coming before you land, the certainty of it, the inability to stop it, the strange parallel awareness that it was going to hurt and that she was going to do it anyway. Then on a Thursday morning everything collapsed. His lieutenant, a tightly wound man named Park who had always looked at Simone like she was a liability on two legs, called her office directly. Not Hyun-seok. Park. Miss Adeyemi. There's a situation. You need to come. The address he gave her was a warehouse on the south side. Every alarm she had went off simultaneously. She almost didn't go. She went. She walked in to find Hyun-seok standing in the middle of a concrete space, jacket gone, a cut across his jaw that someone had roughly bandaged, and the particular controlled stillness of a man who was holding himself together through will alone. Park and two others stood back. There was blood on the floor that did not belong to Hyun-seok. Simone stopped in the doorway. Took it all in. Made herself breathe. What happened? She said. Hyun-seok looked at her across the space. In his eyes was something she had not seen there before, not the focus control, not the warmth she had gotten used to over 3 weeks. This was exposure. Raw and unguarded and clearly not something he allowed often. There's a faction that's been pushing against me for 2 years, he said. His voice was even but the effort was visible. They found out about you. Last night they made contact. Her stomach turned over. What kind of contact? They know where your office is. They know your mother's address in Bronzeville. The air left the room. Simone heard her own heartbeat for a moment, loud and too fast, and then she shut down the fear because fear would not help her right now and she needed to think. Why are you telling me this here? She said. Why not just end things? Cut contact. Make me irrelevant to them. Because that doesn't make you safe. He crossed the space between them. Close now. His eyes on hers were fully open in a way she realized she had never seen from him until this moment. It just makes you alone. And I'm not willing to do that. You don't get to make that decision for me. I know. He stopped directly in front of her. That's why I called you here instead of just stationing people outside your building without telling you. I'm asking, Simone. Tell me what you want. She looked at him, this man who existed in shadows and boardrooms and quiet restaurants at midnight, who had covered her hand over a table and kissed her in the cold like she was worth being careful with. Who was standing here bleeding slightly, telling her the truth when the easier thing would have been to manage her from a distance. I want you to fix it, she said. Something moved through his face. Relief, maybe. And I want to know everything, she continued. Not the version you think I can handle. Everything. A pause. Then, that's going to change things. I know. She held his gaze. Tell me anyway. If this story has you feeling every single emotion right now, drop a comment and tell us what you think Simone should do, and don't forget to hit that like button. It genuinely helps us keep making stories like this for you. He told her everything. It took 4 hours, 2 cups of terrible coffee from a machine in the corner of that warehouse, and a level of honesty that she could tell was not natural to him, not because he was a liar but because he was a man who had spent years operating in spaces where full disclosure was a weapon that could be used against you. He told her about his father and how the organization had been built. About the lines he had held and the ones he had crossed and the ones he had drawn for himself and refused to cross regardless of the cost. About Park and the men around him who had been loyal for years. About the CEO faction, the rivals who had been picking at the edges of his territory for 2 years, looking for a weak point, and who had apparently decided that she was it. She listened to all of it. Asked questions when she needed to. Did not flinch at the parts that should have made her flinch, not because they didn't land but because she had decided before she walked into this warehouse that she was going to receive this information like an adult and make a clear-eyed decision on the other side of it. When he finished it was past midnight. Say something, he said. I'm thinking. Simone. She looked at him. The cut on his jaw had stopped bleeding. In the half-light of the warehouse he looked less like the controlled, composed man she had first seen in that conference room, and more like someone carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time who had just put it down in front of another person for the first time. "You built something real," she said finally. "Whatever else it is, it's real. You made decisions and you own them." She paused. "I don't know if I can live in your world." "I know. But I don't know if I can walk away from you either." He was quiet. "Those two things are both true at the same time," she said. "And I don't know what to do with that." He stood and came to where she was sitting and crouched in front of her so they were level, eye to eye. His hands rested on the arms of the chair on either side of her, and she was enclosed in the space of him without being touched. "Then don't decide tonight," he said quietly. "Just, let me get you somewhere safe. Let me handle the CO problem. And then when everything is quiet, we decide together." "Together," she repeated. "If you'll allow it." She looked at him for a long moment. This close she could see the exhaustion behind his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the particular look of a man who had already decided what he wanted and was waiting with everything he had to find out if the answer was going to undo him. She reached up and touched the bandage on his jaw with the lightest pressure of her fingers. He went very still. "Together," she said. Hyun-seok moved on the CO faction in 48 hours. Simone did not know the specifics and did not ask for them. She knew that Park came to her building the morning after with 4 men who stationed themselves with quiet efficiency, and that her mother's block in Bronzeville had 2 additional pairs of eyes on it without her mother knowing anything about it. She knew that by the 3rd day the threat had been handled, and that Hyun-seok's name, already spoken in certain Chicago circles the way you speak about weather, as an acknowledged force of nature, was spoken a little differently afterward. She knew because he came to her apartment on the 4th night, and when she opened the door she read the answer on his face before he said a word. "It's done," he said. She stepped back to let him in. He was wearing that same dark shirt, sleeves pushed up, and he looked like a man who had not slept enough in 4 days and did not care. She had been sitting on her kitchen floor going over Lee's documents when he knocked, and she was still in her loose Friday night clothes, a worn Howard sweatshirt, bare feet, her natural curls loose and unmanaged around her face. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever had the privilege of standing in front of. She closed the door. The apartment was quiet. Just them. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Now I am." She crossed to him and put her hand flat against his chest and felt his heart beating under her palm, fast, for a man so composed. His hands came to her waist. "Careful. Like always, careful. You came here first," she said softly. "Before anything else. You were always the first thing," he said. His voice was low and completely unguarded. "From the moment you walked into that room and looked at a gun on a table and didn't run, you were the first thing." Something inside her came loose all at once. She pushed up onto her toes and kissed him, and this time neither of them held anything back. His arms wrapped around her and pulled her fully against him, and she felt the breath leave his body when she did, like the last of something releasing. She kissed him slow and then deeper, and his hands moved up her back and into her hair, and he kissed her back like she was a language he had spent weeks learning how to speak properly. They moved through the apartment by degrees, no urgency, just the steady deliberate unwinding of 2 people who had been holding themselves at a careful distance for too long. He was attentive in the way she had come to understand was simply how he operated, fully present, missing nothing, every touch considered. He laid her down like she was something he planned to take his time with, which he did, and she let herself stop being in her head for the first time in weeks. Afterward she lay against his chest in the dark of her bedroom, the Chicago skyline faint through the curtains, his hand moving slowly through her curls. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. "Not a question." "I know." His hand paused in her hair. "Neither am I." She closed her eyes. Under her cheek she could feel his heartbeat, steady now, unhurried. "Your world is terrifying," she said. "Yes. And I am apparently unbothered by that in a way that should probably concern me. She felt the breath of a quiet laugh move through his chest. Probably, he agreed. She pressed closer. He held her tighter. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did, loud and relentless and entirely indifferent to the two people inside this apartment who had collided by accident in a conference room and ended up here, tangled and quiet and certain of each other in the particular way you become certain of something that was always going to happen, that could not have gone any other way, that feels less like a choice and more like the completion of something that was already in motion long before either of you arrived. The empire was his. The chaos was real. But this, her hand over his heart, his arms around her, the silence between them that required nothing more, this was the only part that felt like it actually belonged to him. She smiled against his chest without meaning to. He noticed. He always noticed. What? He murmured. Nothing, she said. Everything. He pressed his lips to the top of her head and didn't let go. Neither did she. Thank you so much for watching Crowned in Chaos all the way to the end. If this story moved you, wrecked you, or made you feel something real, please like this video right now because it tells us to make more like this. Subscribe if you are not already part of this community because episode 2 is coming and Hyun-seok and Simone are not finished yet, not by a long way. And drop a comment below telling us what you want to see next. We read every single one. We'll see you in the next one.